Fenris stood at the center of the 12-seat council floor with her palms open because closed fists would have looked like guilt, and Chancellor Varric was counting on that. Around her, carved stone wolves watched from the upper walls, each one set above a council chair that had ruled this kingdom longer than any living memory. 12 chairs, 12 voices that could decide whether people in the Omega Quarter would keep starving through winter contracts that looked legal on paper and murderous in practice. She could present petitions in this chamber by constitutional custom. Everyone knew that. Everyone liked saying the custom proved fairness, but she could not vote. She could ask for justice and still be kept outside the lock that opened the door. Varric let the silence stretch until her throat burned. He held a bundle of petitions, her petitions, and raised one sheet between two fingers as if he were pinching something rotten. 487 signatures, he said. How many of them did you invent? Fenris heard the rustle of robes before she heard the first whisper. Unbondable girl, ward fraud, Omega arrogance. The old words never changed shape, they only dressed in legal language when elites needed to strike politely. King Orion Blackwood sat at the apex chair, dark hair combed back, face carved into stillness so precise she had once thought it meant contempt. He did not move when Varric spoke. He did not look at her with comfort, or warning, or anything she could use. Varric laid down the next blow with practiced grace. Forgery before the council carries sentence of exile, immediate upon confirmation. The room shifted. Some councillors leaned back with relief, as if a difficult nuisance had solved itself. Others watched Orion, waiting for the king to nod and make this clean. Fenris felt 19 again, standing under winter banners as Varric branded her unbondable at the winter rank right in 721 CR, while everyone she loved discovered urgent interest in the floor. He had done it publicly once. He was doing it again. She reached for the only weapon she still controlled, the truth spoken where it could hurt her. Open the ledgers. Audit every cent seal against ward registries. If one is false, send me out in chains. The chamber doors opened before Varric could answer. Captain Kai Thorne entered in full guard black, boots striking stone in hard rhythm, 4 archivists behind him carrying lockboxes sealed with the royal crest and war wax. Orion rose. When he stood, the chamber changed texture. Conversation died the way fire dies under snow, sudden and complete. By wartime clause, Orion said, voice low, controlled, final. I invoke a 30-day emergency decree. The petition is under Crown protection pending full verification. Any action against the Omega representative before audit is treason. For the first time since the accusation began, Varric lost control of his face. Fenris stared at the king and felt the world tilt, because protection from him should have felt like victory. Yet the expression he turned on Varric carried something older and sharper than politics, and she had no framework for what she was seeing. By dusk the same day, she would learn Orion had already drafted the same 7 reforms in secret, line for line, while she believed she had been shouting alone into stone. By dawn, she would discover that surviving this decree would require her to choose between the aunt who raised her and the law she had promised to defend. By the week's end, the king would break an alliance that kept borders quiet and put a target on both their backs. To understand why Fenris still chose to walk toward him, before the whole kingdom, she had to go back to the winter where her name was cut out of its future. In 721 CR, the winter rank right was supposed to settle where each young wolf stood in pack order, who would train where, who could petition for future bond contracts, who received housing protections beyond seasonal charity. Fenris had entered the hall in borrowed gray woolen boots, one size too large, with Celine at her shoulder and Leora waiting in the crowd, both of them trying to smile hard enough to make hope believable. Varric had presided that day as he presided now, immaculate, patient, and gifted with that dangerous kind of courtesy people mistake for fairness. He called names. He read assignments. He thanked bloodlines for their service. When he reached Fenris Starfall, he paused in exactly the right place for the room to feel the coming drop. "Unbondable," he announced. "No fight, no evidence. One word, spoken into custom, and custom hardened into law around it." Unbondable meant she could be assigned labor contracts without reciprocal protections. It meant no bonded household could claim duty to shelter her. It meant every future negotiation began with a legal mark that told higher ranks she was disposable and told lower ranks they were not allowed to challenge that judgment. She remembered the sound of one person coughing in the silence, remembered Celine's fingers gripping her forearm hard enough to bruise, remembered not crying because crying in public gave predators a place to set the hook. Leora tried to push through the rows to reach her, got blocked by stewards, and stood there shaking with rage she was too low-ranked to spend. That night, Celine shut their quarter door, braced both hands on the table, and delivered survival as a doctrine. You keep your head down. You take work. You do not ask to be seen by people who enjoy proving they can refuse you. Celine was Omega Quarter matron by grim competence, a woman who had kept children fed on ration scraps and repaired roofs with salvaged iron, while counselors debated budgets over mulled wine. Fenris owed her everything that counted as childhood. She also hated how quickly love could turn into a smaller life. She obeyed for 3 years, because disobedience required options she did not have. She worked records in the ration house by day and copied disputes by candlelight for neighbors who could not read formal script. She learned which guards accepted bribes in grain, which clerks delayed medicine permits unless you knelt, which legal phrases could force an abusive contract into review if filed before dawn. By 724 CR, grain ration abuse in Omega wards grew too obvious to bury. 3 children from North Stair Block died in the same cold week while warehouse ledgers claimed full distribution. The lie was clumsy and cruel, and for once, cruelty overreached. Protests started small, then filled market squares with workers who had never raised voices in public before because hunger had already taken what fear usually protected. The council offered concession in the shape of symbolism. They authorized election of the first Omega representative, a non-voting seat allowed to present petitions and witness deliberations. It was designed to cool anger without changing power. Celine said the same thing to Fenris the night nominations opened. "They are handing us a window painted to look like a door." Fenris heard the warning and ran anyway. She won by 47 ballots over 2 older candidates with cleaner reputations, mainly because everyone who signed her nomination had seen her refuse to falsify ration loss records for a steward tied to Varek's office. The new role gave her entry to archives and hearings, which gave her sightlines into how theft moved. Theft in this kingdom did not wear a dagger. It wore clauses, late fees, emergency transfers, smell-proof ink that erased amendment history from copies sent to low wards. Leora became her petition clerk because detail was Leora's form of courage. She could track mismatched stamps through 6 months of filing cabinets and come back with the exact name of the lieutenant who signed all of them at midnight. They spent early 725 CR assembling a 7-clause reform petition that attacked the mechanics, not the rhetoric. Clause 1 mandated transparent ration ledgers posted weekly in every ward. Clause 2 barred labor contracts that traded food for debt at interest rates set by rank. Clause 3 established independent cent seal verification for all bond and transfer documents. Clause 4 required housing minimums during winter for unbonded adults and children. Clause 5 protected witnesses who reported abuse by council staff or guard officers. Clause 6 allowed Omega Quarter legal clerks to inspect ward registries without chancellor approval. Clause 7 created penalties for officials who altered allocation ledgers. None of it was romantic language. Every line was built to survive committee attack. They gathered signatures at dawn markets, night shifts outside foundries, bathhouse queues, temple steps after morning rites. Fenris learned who hesitated from fear of losing work contracts, who signed immediately, who asked if this would cost her life, and signed anyway, when she said yes. Possibly. When the count reached 487 verified signatures, Leora stopped writing and pressed the pen into Fenris's hand like a ceremonial blade. No revisions now. If we keep polishing, it dies in the drawer. That sentence resolved a hesitation Fenris had hidden from herself. Before that moment, she had been unable to submit, because she still hoped for a safer week, a calmer council mood, a sign that risk might shrink. Leora's insistence made delay impossible, and submission became possible only because retreat was named out loud. The first real pull of Orion's gravity came before she met him directly. At a spring hearing on border levy renewals, she sat on the witness bench reserved for non-voting delegates, close enough to see the king's profile and far enough to be ignored by anyone who mattered. He had ruled 7 years, inherited after his father's death, stabilized 3 hostile borders, and earned a reputation for discipline so complete that people described him in architectural terms. He was a wall. He was a blade. He was winter held upright by policy. Fenris watched him dismiss a minister's inflated casualty report with 3 questions that exposed the fraud without raising his voice once. She also watched him rub his left thumb against the side of his index finger when the minister mentioned betrayal by an inner circle aide during the previous reign. A small repetitive motion so brief she wondered if she imagined it. Rumor had story versions for his wound. A former intended who sold troop routes to rivals, a trusted cousin who weaponized private correspondence, a guard captain who failed at the wrong hour. No one agreed on details. Everyone agreed on outcome. Orion trusted process, not people. He did not court softness. He did not leave openings. When she rose later to file procedural notice for her coming petition, Varek intercepted her in the corridor with polite concern sharpened like glass. Representation is delicate, Representative Starfall. Aspirations beyond custom can make your constituency suffer. She answered before fear could draft a safer line. Constituencies suffer when custom protects theft. That answer reached Orion within the hour through channels she could not see. In his private office, he listened while Kai summarized the exchange and laid down a copied transcript of Fenris's filed clauses beside another stack, older, marked in Orion's own hand. The 2 documents mirrored each other so closely Kai swore quietly and checked dates twice. Orion kept his reaction contained. Do not contact her, not yet. He had drafted equivalent reforms over 8 months, anticipating resistance so severe that premature disclosure would trigger sabotage. Weeks before Fenris filed, a decoy policy packet leaked from committee circulation, and a registry annex burned that same night, which confirmed Varek's network was waiting for targets. Orion moved his real drafts to restricted war archive, time-sealed by royal scribes, because hidden text could not be altered in transit, and hidden dates could later prove intent existed before political convenience. Allowing her to present first resolved one obstacle. He had been unable to test whether her motive was principle or placement, while his authority overshadowed the process. Her independent filing made trust, cautious and narrow, possible. Fenris finally met him face-to-face in mid-725 CR on the day she presented the petition before the 12-seat council. She expected hostility. She prepared for condescension. She did not prepare for attention that felt like standing under weather. When she entered, Orion was already seated at the apex chair. His gaze touched her once, moved away, returned a heartbeat later as if some private calculus had shifted mid-step. She mistook the second look for strategic assessment and pressed her notes harder between damp fingers. She read all 7 clauses without embellishment. Varek interrupted on procedural technicalities 3 times. Fenris answered with cited charter language each time. Councillor Merrick from East Ridge tried to reduce housing minimums into charity recommendations. She refused politely and read testimony from two families frozen out of bonded compounds during last storm cycle. When she finished, Orion asked one question. Who authored Clause 3 verification protocol? Petition office, she said. Clerk Leora Vale and I. His jaw tightened, slight, almost invisible. Submit your source matrix to Royal Archive before sunset. Fenris heard command, not respect. She left the chamber shaking with anger, convinced the king intended to absorb her work and neutralize her as a symbolic participant. By nightfall, Leora arrived at her door with eyes wide and breathless, carrying a copied draft from archive access that should have been impossible to obtain. Fen, she whispered, unfolding the pages on the table. Read the date. Orion's private reform package, filed under restricted seal 2 moons earlier, contained the same 7 structural changes, same sequencing, same verification protocol language down to 3 unusual phrasing choices Leora insisted no 2 clerks would coincidentally share. The discovery should have relieved her. Instead, it deepened the misread and made it personal. If he agreed, why keep his draft hidden while people suffered? If he intended reform, why let Varek's office continue crushing witness complaints for months? She interpreted secrecy through the wound 721CR carved into her. Powerful men kept doors closed to preserve their timing, never because they feared for her safety. The next morning, Varek moved before she could adapt. He filed formal accusation that 163 of the 487 signatures were forged, citing scent seal inconsistencies and duplicated registry marks. He requested immediate suspension of Fenris's representative status pending criminal review. The number was chosen for impact. Large enough to stain. Precise enough to sound audited. Celine came to the office pale and furious. Withdraw petition. Accept quiet censure, keep your room, keep your work. You cannot beat his office in open hearing. Fenris tasted old obedience at the back of her throat. She also saw North-Stair children in winter blankets, too thin for weather this cold. I will not settle in private, Fenris told Celine. That decision resolved her remaining passivity. Before refusing settlement, she was trapped in defensive survival, negotiating penalties behind closed doors. Refusal forced the dispute into formal audit where records could expose wider tampering, making systemic defense possible. Celine slapped the table, not her, which made it hurt more. Principle will bury you. Silence already tried, Fenris said. Leora secured hearing notice for the same day. Varek intended speed, assuming fear would fracture Fenris's witness base before sunset. The chamber filled beyond capacity with ward clerks, stewards, guard officers, and spectators hungry for public ruin. That was the opening scene where Varek accused, where Orion invoked the 30-day emergency decree, where lockboxes entered under Kai's command. The decree halted immediate sanctions, not investigation. Varek smiled through clenched teeth and requested expedited audit panel with his own office supervising chain of custody. Orion denied him in one sentence. Royal Archive and ward registrars hold chain. Chancellor's staff are excluded pending review. For 30 days, Fenris lived between protection and exposure. Kai placed 2 guards outside her rooms every night. She hated it at first, reading it as containment. On the 4th night, 1 guard intercepted a kitchen runner carrying tea laced with moonroot sedative and a note offering private reconciliation if she withdrew testimony. The runner served under a steward tied to Varek's brother-in-law. Protection stopped being abstract. Orion never visited her rooms. He summoned her twice to archive review sessions with full scribes present, professional distance maintained, so no counselor could accuse covert coercion. During the second session, she challenged an exclusion clause in his draft enforcement language that would have allowed discretionary delay during border crises. He looked up sharply. Delay allows abuse. Then strike it, she said. He held her gaze for a long second. Agreed. The king's first mask crack came in a place no one was supposed to notice. When a senior registrar dismissed Leora as quota clerk and tried to remove her from evidentiary review, Orion did not lecture on equity. He said, "Registrar Vale remains," in a tone that ended the argument before it formed. Fenris saw authority used, assumed it was procedural efficiency. The audience around her saw something else. Kings did not spend social capital on unnamed Omega clerks unless someone in the room had become non-negotiable. The second crack came harder. During day 12 of audit, witness Relin, a warehouse porter who signed Clause 1, failed to appear. Hours later, his body was found in canal ice with signs of staged accident. Fenris reached the site before dawn, boots slipping on frozen boards, rage and grief mixing into nausea. Kai arrived moments later with guard detail and, behind him, Orion without cloak or ceremonial escort, hair still damp from rushed washing. He took in the scene, then turned to Kai. "Lock all canal exits. Detain Steward Hallen and his entire ledger team." Hallen was politically connected to 3 council families. Immediate detention without committee review was an aggressive move that signaled risk tolerance no one expected in a document case. Fenris interpreted it as crisis management. Kai, who had served Orion through campaigns, watched his king's hands and recognized the old fracture line, the one betrayal had carved years earlier. Threat to her bypassed calculation. The investigation tied Hallen to payment trails leading into Varek's private discretionary accounts. Ledger tampering now had blood attached. Council moderates who treated petition politics as manageable noise started reading evidence packets at night. Pressure folded inward on Fenris from another direction. Celine had signed emergency ration transfer requests in 724CR under Varek's office authority, some of which now appeared altered post-signature to justify reduced grain allotments. Celine insisted she signed clean documents. Varek's camp implied she knowingly aided fraud. Celine begged Fenris to avoid mention of those transfers in testimony, arguing Varek would bury both of them if family disunity appeared in public record. "You can save the reforms or save me," Celine said in a whisper that sounded like surrender. "Pick one." Fenris spent that night walking quarter rooftops in sleet, replaying every meal Celine had stretched, every fever she had sat through with wet cloth and borrowed herbs, every command to stay small. Love and harm had braided so tightly she could not separate them cleanly. By dawn, she found the line she could live with. She would testify to the altered transfers and defend Celine's lack of intent in the same breath. At day 19 hearing, Celine was called first by Varek's counsel and gave the statement Fenris feared most, asking the panel to suspend her niece until review closed, saying public defiance would starve the quarter if the council retaliated. Celine's voice shook while she spoke, and she did not look at Fenris once. Fenris then did exactly what she had decided in sleet and anger and grief. "These signatures are my aunt's hand," she told the panel. "These amendment marks are not." She authorized emergency movement under starvation conditions. Chancellor's staff altered destinations after filing. Varek pounced. "So your own household facilitated diversion." Fenris met his gaze without lowering hers. "My household survived your diversions." That testimony resolved distrust in a specific way. Before naming Celine's documents openly, Fenris could not partner with power without betraying family memory. Speaking truth while protecting Selene from false intent made moral partnership with Orion possible because she proved she would not trade principle for proximity. Celine wept in the gallery, anger collapsing into something raw, and did not leave when recess called. She returned for supplemental oath before adjournment and corrected her own first statement, naming the steward who delivered altered pages and the threat attached to ration cuts if she refused to sign receipt logs. Opposition had become witness. The audit closed on day 26. Result packets showed 487 signatures valid. none forged. Scent seal inconsistencies came from registry overlays inserted after filing by 3 clerks linked to Varick's office. The presiding verifier read the finding aloud into chamber record, cleared Fenris of forgery in full, and referred falsification charges to Crown prosecutors against Varick's staff. Secondary ledgers uncovered communication between Varick and faction leaders discussing contingency if reforms advanced, including language about executive displacement under emergency incompetence, a legal phrase for staged removal of the king during internal crisis. Coup Network was not rumor anymore. Orion convened emergency council on day 27 with full guard presence and evidence displayed on central projection glass. Varick tried one final procedural gambit, claiming Chancellor correspondence immunity. Orion cut it down. Immunity covers counsel, it does not cover conspiracy. Kai stepped forward with irons in hand. Varick realized, a breath too late, that the room had already moved past him. He looked at Fenris as if he still expected fear to serve him. She held his stare until guards took him. By law, Varick faced stripping of office and exile upon confirmation of coup participation. Confirmation came in 48 hours through seized messages and steward testimony. He was removed, title voided, estates reassigned to Treasury, and escorted beyond Northern Pass under armed watch. The petition survived. The chamber did not become gentle. With Varick gone, the reform vote finally opened for full debate. Passage still required 8 of 12 council votes, no exception. Orion could not legislate permanent code by decree, and he did not try. The emergency clause had bought time, not victory. Council blocks hardened around one remaining lever, the Iron Fang Pack marriage alliance. For months, negotiators had arranged Orion's political bond to Iron Fang heir Mara to stabilize eastern trade routes and deter border raids. Reform sponsors argued justice required immediate passage. Opposition argued elevating Omega legal access would trigger noble resistance that only Iron Fang backing could suppress. Withdraw the alliance, they warned, and you risk both reform failure and military strain. Fenris heard the argument and felt old math return, the kind where women at lower rank became bargaining material inside larger plans. That night, Orion requested private audience in the old war map room, with Kai posted outside and no scribes inside. Fenris considered refusing, then entered because uncertainty had become a weapon used on her too long. Maps glowed under low firelight, pins marking border forts and trade passes. Orion stood by the eastern ridgeline, hands behind his back, every inch king until he turned and spoke her name without title. Fenris. No one in power used her name like that. He told her what secrecy had cost, and why he chose it. Months earlier, after uncovering signs of internal sabotage tied to past betrayal, he drafted reforms in restricted channels to prevent preemptive destruction of witness registries. During audit seizures, Kai's team recovered Varick correspondence ordering registry fires and clerk disappearances the hour any royal reform package entered open committee. Orion's sealed drafts and time-stamped notes now sat in evidence and proved sustained intent. Because those pages predated Fenris's filing and survived precisely because no saboteur could reach them. He watched her petition emerge independently and recognized matching architecture, then delayed intervention to see whether her office could sustain pressure without becoming identified as his proxy. She listened, anger still present, context reshaping its edge. "I thought you were waiting to decide if I was useful," she said. "I was deciding if I could trust what I wanted," he answered. The second vulnerability crack opened, and he did not close it fast enough. "I trusted once and lost men I swore to protect." For one breath the king disappeared, and a tired man stood in his place, carrying memory like shrapnel under skin. He gathered himself almost immediately, posture resetting, voice returning to command cadence. "I will not hide behind that history now." He laid out the cost in plain terms. If he cancelled Iron Fang Alliance, Eastern deterrence weakened and trade penalties were likely within a year. Councillors tied to Iron Fang contracts would revolt politically. Reform passage might still fail if fence votes collapsed under fear. Keeping the alliance preserved stability but required shelving clauses 6 and 7, the enforcement teeth that made abuse punishable. Fenris understood the trap. Accept half law and call it progress, or demand full law and invite retaliation. He met her eyes. I choose full law. That choice resolved Orion's old wound in action, not confession. Before breaking alliance, he had been unable to separate governance from defensive isolation built after betrayal. Choosing reforms over strategic marriage made honest claim possible, because he acted from value rather than fear management. News broke at dawn. Iron Fang envoys departed court within hours. Border scouts reported increased movement near eastern passes by week's end, still below war threshold, high enough to prove risk was real. Council reconvened for final vote under heavy guard. Fenris stood again on council floor without vote rights. Palms steady this time because fear had changed shape. Losing now would hurt differently. She was no longer fighting to be noticed. She was fighting to keep truth from being edited back out of law. Debate ran 6 hours. Clause 1 through 5 gained predictable support. Clause 6, registry inspection access without chancellor approval, triggered elite panic. Clause 7, penalties for official ledger alteration, threatened people who had built careers on procedural fog. Orion did not speechify. He answered objections with concrete enforcement models, budget offsets, and border contingency plans drafted overnight with Kai and quarter logisticians, including Leora's projections on clerk staffing needs. When Councillor Wren from Stone Vale accused him of jeopardizing legacy for personal impulse, Orion said only, "Legacy that protects theft is rot." Vote bells rang. One by one, carved wolf sigils lit above each seat. 8 lights held. 4 remained dark. Reforms passed 8-4 in late 725 CR. The chamber did not erupt. Relief arrived like collapse after prolonged cold. Fenris closed her eyes and saw North Stair children again, this time with blankets that might actually be delivered because someone would go to prison for stealing them. Next obstacle opened before celebration could breathe. Opposition factions spread immediate rumor that Orion canceled Iron Fang alliance to install a manipulable Omega figure at court and consolidate populist control. The claim threatened to recast reforms as royal lust policy, which would delegitimize enforcement and isolate Fenris as scandal center. Public claim could settle it or destroy both of them. If Orion claimed her as mate before witnesses, he would make political statement irreversible and tie throne credibility to a woman marked unbondable in 721 CR. If he stayed distant, enemies could frame her as temporary instrument. Fenris expected him to delay. He asked for the Hall of Witnesses at sundown. The hall filled with council members, ward delegates, guard captains, and registry scribes. Selene stood near the back beside Leora, hands clenched around a shawl fringe until knuckles whitened. Kai took position at Orion's right, expression unreadable, the posture of a soldier about to watch his commander walk willingly into crossfire. Fenris entered in plain dark dress, no jewels, the same silver clasp she wore during petition filings. She felt every eye on the old mark at her wrist, the one branded unbondable under winter right law. Orion stepped down from the dais to meet her at floor level. That alone rewrote protocol. Kings received. They did not descend. He spoke for the room. In 721 CR, this kingdom called Fenris Starfall unbondable under authority corrupted by status fear. In 725 CR, under lawful witness, I reject that judgment. He took her wrist gently, turned the scar toward the witnesses, and laid his palm over it. Heat moved through skin like opening iron warmed for repair instead of punishment. Scent shifted in the hall, wolves lifting heads as instinct recognized claim before language caught up. The chief right clerk carried forward the 721 CR rank ledger under torchlight, read the old mark into record, and waited. Fenris Starfall is my mate, Orion said. By King's authority and Alpha Bond, she is claimed, protected, and seated as co-author of the Reform Code enacted this day. The words landed with the finality of stone setting. At Orion's nod, the clerk struck one line through unbondable, entered lawfully claimed under witness, and sealed the correction with counsel and crown wax where everyone could see it done. Fenris's abandonment wound spoke one last time, quick and cruel. He will withdraw this when pressure rises, as everyone else did. She looked at the faces in the hall, at the 4 counselors who had voted no, at Iron Fang envoys, absent by choice, at Celine, trembling in the back. Permanent safety had never existed in her world. Choice under risk was the only real thing. Orion did not squeeze her wrist to force answer. He waited. Her active choice came in public and cost named in full. If she accepted, she invited political attack, possible border escalation, and permanent scrutiny from a court that had humiliated her before. If she refused, reforms would survive legally, but opposition could isolate implementation by framing the king's action as unilateral obsession. She lifted her chin and spoke to witnesses, not whispering for him alone. I choose Orion Blackwood. I choose this claim with full knowledge of what it costs. That sentence resolved her abandonment wound. Before speaking, she was still waiting to be discarded when convenient. Publicly choosing under threat transformed her from chosen object into equal author of consequence. Right scribes recorded the claim in triple registry. Council stamped co-authorship addendum before midnight. Enforcement offices opened at dawn. The weeks that followed were work, not fantasy haze. Clause 1 posted ration ledgers in every ward within 10 days. Clause 2 voided 312 predatory labor contracts in first review cycle. Clause 3, verification teams trained under mixed-rank supervision. Leora appointed Omega Legal Registrar to run intake and maintain Scent Seal audit standards. She slept at her desk more nights than she admitted and smiled like someone who had been handed the exact burden she wanted. Clause 4, winter housing minimums forced bonded compounds to open reserve quarters or pay steep penalties. Several elites paid first fines, assuming rules would fade. Orion ordered collections enforced against 2 council family estates to prove equal application. Payments funded North Stair insulation repairs before first frost. Clause 5 witness protections brought forward testimony against 4 mid-level stewards and 1 guard lieutenant. Clause 6. Registry inspection access turned Omega clerks into feared auditors in the best possible way. Clause 7 penalties sent 3 officials to prison for ledger alteration in the first month, a statistic repeated in taverns with cautious disbelief. Celine appeared at Fenris's office doorway on a rain morning carrying a basket of still warm rye and no defense prepared. I taught you to survive small, she said. You survived bigger. I was wrong about what that required. Fenris did not answer immediately, because easy comfort would have made the break meaningless. She asked one question first. Will you put your name to what Varric made you do? Celine nodded once. I already did. Supplemental oath is filed. Fenris pulled out the second chair and they began again without pretending the gap never existed. Reconciliation came through paperwork first. Celine testified in follow-up hearings about chancellor pressure tactics, helping secure convictions and clarifying how matron offices had been coerced through ration blackmail. Kai requested transfer to Border Command after the code stabilized. He told Orion in private that the capital no longer needed his particular kind of vigilance every hour, while the eastern passes did after Iron Fang withdrawal. Orion approved with visible reluctance. Fenris found Kai in the courtyard before departure and thanked him for bringing those lockboxes into the chamber when her name was one vote from ruin. He nodded once and said, "You made them count." Military risk from broken alliance did not vanish. It settled into a tense normal. Iron Fang patrols tested boundary lines twice that winter. Both incidents resolved through hard negotiation and visible readiness. No full war came. Everyone understood it still could if diplomacy failed, and governance proceeded with that weather at the horizon. Varek's exile closed in late winter when border wardens confirmed he crossed Northern Pass under guard and was barred from returning on pain of execution. His name remained in legal records attached to coup charges and document tampering judgments, which mattered because memory in institutions was often the first casualty after scandal. Fenris moved into royal residence slowly, keeping her old quarter office active 3 days each week by her own rule. Co-author title gave her direct access to implementation councils and budget review, authority she used to block 2 attempts at silent underfunding from noble blocs that had accepted legal defeat, and switched to administrative sabotage. Orion backed her interventions publicly even when advisors warned visible alignment would inflame critics. He had already paid that price and chose to keep paying it. Their private life formed in increments built from trust, not mating heat fantasy. Orion woke from old betrayal dreams some nights, reaching for dagger hilt before memory caught up. Fenris learned to place her hand over his wrist and wait until his breathing changed. Fenris flinched at public applause for months because crowd noise still carried 721 CR in her bones. Orion learned to step half a pace behind her in ceremonial entries, so attention reached her first as recognition, not display. When disagreement came, it came real. She accused him once of withholding border casualty projections to shield her from fear. He answered with numbers, maps, and apology in the same conversation, then asked what information threshold she required to make joint decisions. The language gap between decree and dialogue narrowed because he chose to learn it. Spring of 726 CR brought first full winter outcome report under new code. Omega ward mortality dropped sharply relative to 724 CR due to housing enforcement and ration transparency. Contract coercion complaints rose, which looked bad, until investigators explained increase reflected safer reporting under Clause 5 protections. Fenris presented findings before the same 12-seat council where she had once stood accused. She still could not vote. Constitutional custom remained unchanged. She no longer asked permission to matter inside it. At the close of that session, Orion requested floor recognition and did something no king in living record had done. He cited co-authorship precedent and moved to formalize a standing advisory vote for the Omega representative on implementation matters, non-binding to preserve charter, recorded to ensure policy accountability. Council approved after contentious debate. A smaller reform nested inside the larger one, proof that institutions could bend without breaking when pressure stayed organized. That night, the court hosted a restrained winter feast for implementation teams, clerks, ward builders, and witness families, not only nobles. Leora danced once, badly, laughed harder than Fenris had heard in years, and returned to discussing registry staffing with 2 masons before music ended. Selene sat at high table edge in plain blue, uncomfortable with silk napkins, proud in a way she tried to hide and failed. Orion raised one glass, no long speech. To those who filed, signed, testified, and stayed. Fenris watched him from her seat at his right and understood the line from beginning to now. He had seen her before she could accept being seen, protected her before she trusted protection, and changed law in ways that made his claim answerable to the world, not sheltered from it. Later, after guests departed and torches burned low, Fenris and Orion walked the outer balcony above the city. Snow began in fine dry threads, catching lantern light over rooftops where Omega wards and noble compounds looked briefly the same under white. She leaned on the stone rail and listened to distant market bells. When Varric said unbondable in 721 CR, I believed him for years. Orion stood beside her, close enough for warmth, not crowding. The mark was a lie backed by power. Power can be rewritten. She smiled at that, small and tired and fully present. We rewrote it. Below them, ward windows glowed in steady rows where winter housing had been repaired and supplied under clause enforcement. In archive vaults, triple registries held signatures that could no longer be erased by one office's preference, and the winter rank right ledger now carried her corrected status under witnessed claim. In border forts, Kai prepared Eastern patrol rotations under new tension created by choices all of them had made with open eyes. In exile, Varric no longer controlled language. Fenris touched the scar at her wrist, now warmed smooth where the old brand had ridged, and felt no need to hide it. By the time spring markets reopened, children in North Stair argued over bread prices instead of burial cloth. Selene trained younger matrons to document coercion. Before it hardened into custom, Leora's registry office ran so efficiently that even hostile counselors used its templates, and the king, who had once ruled from armored distance, asked his mate before issuing decrees that touched her code. Fenris was still the Omega representative who had presented the reform petition. She was also the woman the Alpha King had claimed in full witness, not as ornament, as partner, as co-author, as the person whose moral seriousness had forced his world to admit what it had always tried to deny. She had been told in public that she was not worth binding. In late 725 CR, under law, under scrutiny, under risk, the most powerful man in the kingdom chose her, and she chose him back, and neither of them chose cheaply.